Okay. So welcome very much and thanks for joining us tonight. Especially thanks for anyone who tried, and probably most of you, to get in the other night, and we had problems with the link. I'm Camilla Reeve of Palewell Press, and we particularly focus on books about human rights and the environment. So we're thrilled to be publishing Alwyn's book because of our interest in diversity and her work about women and women across the ages, women in our own time, and the challenges they face are absolutely relevant to Palewell Press. Now, before we do an introduction, I just want to let you know I'd like you all to be on mute. So if you can put yourselves onto mute now, apart from me and Alwyn. If you need to, you can use the chat function at the bottom of the screen to share comments or questions. And at the end, we'll have a question and answer session when you can, I will either look through chat or you can raise your hand using the reactions button. Now, obviously, if you're using an iPad or some device that's a tablet rather than a computer, your buttons may be in the wrong place from what I'm telling you. Apologies for that. But if it's a PC, the chances are that they're at the bottom of the screen. So I'd like to start, even though some of you already know Alwyn, with a brief introduction because she does have such a terrific track record. Widely published in magazines, anthologies, and online, her 15 published books include poetry, fiction, and non-fiction. That's quite unusual. Most people tend to fall into one of those categories. She's a member of the Devon Company of Poets and Moor Poets, and her most recent poetry collections are In the Image, Portraits of Medieval Women, published by Indigo Dreams in 2017, and Pandora's Pandemic, SPM Publications in 2021. She's won several prizes for her writing and gives frequent guest lectures and poetry readings around Britain, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. And I really wouldn't mind doing that myself. I loved Australia. Like me, she's a publishing editor, having run Oversteps Books since 2008, and she serves on the Society of Authors Poetry and Spoken Word Group Committee. It's also a pleasure working with her because she's keen on the environment like we are. And she's a member of Poets for the Planet and played an active part in their Twitter campaign, Begin Afresh. This evening, she'll read poems from possibly a Pomegranate, after which there'll be a Q&A. Please save your questions till then. And it now gives me enormous pleasure to hand over to Alwyn.
That worked?
Yeah.
Good. Hi. I didn't set out to write a collection about women, but poems about being a woman and about historical women or mythical women kept arriving unbidden. A few years ago, In the Image came out, my little book, and that dealt with some of the wonderful medieval women. And a few of those same poems appear in this collection too, though not my favorite, which is Chiara, which is much too long to go into this book, but is available as an ebook if anybody wants it from Cut. Gradually, I realized that I had more than enough poems on the theme for a whole book, probably for two. So I sent a batch to Palewell, and Camilla was kind enough to accept them. She obviously couldn't include them all, but at nearly 100 pages, this is the largest collection I've produced so far. Having now had 15 books in various genres published, I've worked with quite a number of different publishers and editors, good, bad, and indifferent. Of all of them, Palewell has been by far the best, and working with Camilla has been a delight from start to finish. So thank you, Camilla. Right, on to the poems. So get rid of that, stop sharing. Can't remember how to do it.
Button at the top.
Oh, there, thank you. Right, back we go. You'll find that quite a number of poems about different subjects actually underneath say something about words or about writing poetry. And that's the case with this first poem, which is called La Matelote. La Matelote is a restaurant in Boulogne, which we passed once on our way back from France. And it's quite an expensive restaurant, so we didn't eat there. But I was fascinated by the title, the name of the restaurant, La Matelote. The restaurant was called La Matelote, the same word as le matelot, but ending in an E and therefore feminine. We debated what a female sailor would be called in English, other than, of course, a sailor. Fishwife hasn't quite the same éclat. Shore-bound and down to earth, she scolds her husband, wipes scale-covered hands on bloodied apron. Sailor girl sounds far more jaunty, even saucy, a jolly sea shanty of a lass who's good at knots but lacks maturity. A woman of the waves, though cumbersome, has a more romantic ring, laid back and offering her ebb and flow, her undulating curves. In our minds, these women all transmogrified into a mermaid, sea-born and always breaking free, like words for which there's no equivalent. Consulting a dictionary to check the latest addition to our French vocabulary, we found la matelote simply means fish stew. The next couple of poems are about youth, my youth. And this one is about a holiday romance when I was only 15. It's called Finger Four. Away from home and parents, 15 years old and starry-eyed, I was taken fishing in a rowing boat by Jimmy on the Clyde. We were singing, "James, James, hold the ladder steady," when the hook on his line flew in my direction, catching the edge of my left hand's fourth finger and drawing blood. It didn't hurt much, but left a little scar that failed to fade entirely, even when that holiday romance and all my memories of Jimmy were overlaid, and someone else, just a few years later, slipped a ring onto that finger. After half a century of wear and tear and faithfulness, the gold still shines today. But even now, if I remove my wedding ring, I find a faint reminder of a Scottish boy who, though he sang so sweetly on a sunny day, failed to catch any fish or me. In my teens, I lived in South London, and this poem is about, I used to go up to London quite a lot and come back late at night. And too many of us women have had to put up with unwanted male attention. So I wrote this poem. And is it a poem about being a young woman in a London suburb, or about my mother and every mother? Late home. Midnight in South London, and the last suburban train spills out the artless attractiveness of youth, inviting danger, or at least unwelcome attention, during that final, unavoidable solo mile through darkness from the station, where curb crawlers call obscenities, and you learn to minimize their threat by walking briskly counter flow instead of dawdling, checking that no car is following when you turn from the main road into your quiet residential street, where 50 yards ahead, the curtain of a house is pulled aside, and you see, with mixed relief and irritation, a pale face pressed to the window, and you know that by the time you reach the gate, it will have disappeared, so that when you enter the safe haven of home, all will be silent, still, the sense of a mother's satisfaction palpable. This next poem was written for a friend who had to watch helplessly as her husband descended into the darkness of Alzheimer's, all too common experience. So it's called Losing It, and it was for a friend called Jen. Losing It. At first, it was just the odd word that he lost, common words that somehow slipped from his memory instead of off his tongue. And they laughed together at the worst of these aberrations, saw them simply as symptoms of the normal aging process. Then he mislaid names of people with whom he was familiar, became embarrassed, and then ceased to care, unaware that there would be no cure for the disappearing past, the gritty palimpsest wiped clean by his forgetfulness, until finally the thread of his reality unraveled in a fog and fury that was closing in on him. He lost his job, could not remember why it ever mattered. Then, because they could no longer cope with gardening, bills, and all the rest, they sold the house that they had bought together and in which their family had grown and flown the nest to become strangers to him. It wasn't long before she realized that though she still lived with a man who looked like him, she had lost her husband. Sorry, that's a bit grim, isn't it? There are other ways of losing those we love that are much less painful. When children fly the nest, it can feel like a final farewell, but actually it very rarely is. This poem's called Moving On. The first time I heard you speak of home, not meaning the house where I live and where you'd spent your childhood, there was a slight but perceptible shuddering in my foundations. Flesh from my flesh. Ever since your journey started, I had been letting go, but feared this visible and physical realignment of our world might lead to the final separation. Time proved the opposite, but for a while I had to watch while you learnt to adjust to life in a place you didn't know, while I just as tentatively grew accustomed to a home empty of you. In an uncertain and unstable world, it is very good to celebrate love that has stood the test of time. And this poem is called Couple, Arm in Arm. Young and newly forged in love, they couldn't bear to be apart, clung as close in walking as in sleeping, oblivious to worlds beyond the entwining of their shared proximity, electric currents sparking back and forth between them. 50 years of faithfulness have flown, and now, still walking arm in arm, they tenderly but surreptitiously support each other. She a bird in his branches, he the wine in her cup. I've had a special request for this next poem. It's called Sappho. Women through the ages are celebrated in this book. The earliest example of womankind in the book is the little prehistoric dolly goddess, the Venus of Willendorf, which I'm not reading tonight. The next earliest is Sappho, the ancient Greek poet who lived on the island of Lesbos in the 5th to 6th centuries BC, 6th to 5th centuries BC. It's a glose, the poetic form glose, which takes a short passage from another person's writing and uses the lines in the correct order as the last lines of each stanza of a new poem. We've only got fragments of Sappho's poetry. I would love to have more, but this is one of her fragments. It's fragment 52. I'll read the little fragment first. Tonight, I've watched the moon, and then the Pleiades go down. The night is now half gone. Youth goes. I am in bed, alone. So I had fun making 4 new stanzas, of which the last line of each one is one of those lines. So Sappho. Last night and every night since we first met, we slept together, shared the secrets of our hearts, discussed philosophy and poetry. But now you've left. I swoon with misery in my empty bed, knowing you will not come. To learn how inconstant love can change so soon, tonight I've watched the moon. Other loves have come and gone, lighting up the darkness of my life, like the 7 sisters of the midnight sky. Some I loved for the beauty of their bodies, while others brought illumination to my mind. But you alone deserved to be the crown of my affection. Your brightness lit my way through misunderstanding and disgrace. But now I watch the lights extinguished in the town, and then the Pleiades go down. I drank so deeply at the springs of wisdom, gave my life and soul to poetry. Fame came at last, the praise of those who saw me as a star. I burned and blazed across the sky, and every night while others slept, I still wrote on, brightening the world with words. But now I am eclipsed. Light fades where once stars shone. The night is now half gone. Nothing is constant, and all too soon the winds of fortune shake the branches, sending fragments of papyrus fluttering down through history. I fear this palimpsest of poetry is all for which I'll be remembered. Youth, fame, and love have now all flown, and you have gone. As my star fades and age creeps up on me, I'm lost. But you, no doubt, would laugh and say, I should have known. Youth goes. I am in bed, alone. So it's quite fun playing with forms like that. In the 1990s, I was the chief executive of 2 international literacy and literature NGOs, aid agencies. It didn't give me much time to write poetry as I dashed around the poorest parts of the world. But recently I found myself writing quite a number about my travels and the lovely people I met. And I'm hoping that this will be the focus of my next collection. I've got quite a lot of them, and I'm hoping to put them into another collection before too long. This one of the places I liked best that I visited was Bolivia. And I was up on the high Altiplano, and we saw this little girl, this 10-year-old girl go back. I think she was about then. So this is called Schoolgirl Bolivia. High on the Altiplano, you follow a donkey track, barefoot, carrying tucked under your arm a book. When you are older, you'll wear a bowler hat, drink coca tea, have babies, cook corn in an old clay pot. Remember how you used to walk 10 miles to school and back, and the soft, sweet smell left behind by pack animals trudging the path ahead of you in bright, clear air. A vulture circling overhead, and a cactus flowering once in 100 years. On my travels to work, some of my favorite visits were to women's literacy projects in Africa, India, Bangladesh, and Latin America. And so I wrote this loose sonnet, which is called Women's Literacy Class, Bangladesh. After traveling deep into the paddy on a rickshaw, we balanced on a strip of dry bank between 2 flooded rice fields to cover the final kilometre on foot. 10 teenaged village girls had been away to receive 3 weeks of basic training in how to read and write and how to teach before returning to share their expertise. We sat on bare ground, chickens pecking among us, as gradually the corners of saris covering shy faces dropped away, along with the darkness of ignorance, revealing newfound confidence and hope. At the back, beyond the circle of light, the men stood in a ring, looking nonchalant, gazing at their feet, secretly listening. It's always said that if you want to teach literacy or teach anything to a community, you teach the women and it spreads. And actually I saw that in practice there, that the men were making sure that nobody really knew that they were listening, but they were learning all the same. Getting towards the end, these are the last two. So let me share the screen for this one. Is that right? Okay. So this poem is about this Henry Moore sculpture that used to stand on a hillside in southern Scotland until vandals decapitated the figures. Hang on, just get it further in then. If I can. Is that better?
That's good.
Okay. It's been repaired now, but it is in a private collection. Though fortunately, of course, there's another version outside the Tate Gallery in London. There are videos of several of my poems on YouTube, some more professionally recorded than others, none very professionally, I should say. A few years ago, we were in that part of Scotland and we decided to visit the sculpture and make a video of this poem. And on the day we did so, I was treated to a good dose of true Scottish weather as the wind blew and rain swept horizontally.
Yeah.
Consequently, in that video, it's not always easy to hear the words, but it does give a certain authenticity. I was lucky with this poem because it won first prize in a competition, and I always suspected that that was partly because of the title. The title is "The Clue Lies in the Lady's Toe," and it's on visiting Henry Moore's sculpture in Dumfries and Galloway. On a Scottish hillside, the bronze statue of an archetypal king and queen braves the elements, observing perhaps a thread of slit-eyed sheep winding up the hill with careful, delicate tread. Yellow marks like lichen on their rumps, their gaze full of vague, unanswered questions. My mind also struggles to explain the different texture of the metal on the king's right knee, while all the rest is stippled, rippled, riven in a pattern to catch the varying shades of light. His knee is smooth. What point was the sculptor making as he carefully fashioned this one unblemished surface? Only as I descend the hill does a clear-cut memory emerge from long ago, as I recall a constant stream of pilgrims filing past a marble statue of the Queen of Heaven, the slight roughness of the stone contrasting sharply with the smooth and shining toe, which generations of the pious have knelt to fondle and to kiss, wearing away the awkward corners and bringing out a deeper shine. The line of sheep has reached the sculpture now, and as I watch, each sidles up to the impassive king and meditatively rubs her rump against his knee. So how do I get rid of that now? Stop sharing. And we come to the final poem of the evening. Sorry. Having reached the final poem, perhaps it's time to reveal the significance of the title of this collection, in case some of you haven't worked it out yet. The English translation of the story of Adam and Eve has the snake tempting Eve to eat an apple, but apples are not Middle Eastern fruit. The mistake probably arose because in Latin, malum can mean evil or apple, and malus is an apple tree. If it wasn't an apple, what was it? Possibly a pomegranate. It makes no sense to speculate on mundane details of a far-fetched story, including the nature of the fruit Eve picked in the Garden of Eden. Myths may appear unreal and playful, but they present us with the mystery that our oldest stories sometimes hold more truth than history. The closeness of the Latin words for apple and for evil makes it tempting to substitute one for the other. And artists down the ages have perpetuated the confusion, giving flesh to the mythical fruit and displaying with veracity and tenderness the juicy plumpness of an apple. The point is not how many seeds were in the fruit, how sweet or sour or round it was, but what explanation the creative mind of generations could come up with to account for the way things are. The hubris of humanity, our meddlesome nature, our inability to live at peace in paradise, and our capacity for choosing evil. But if we take the story at face value, it may indeed have been an apple, or possibly a pomegranate.
Wonderful. I thoroughly enjoyed that. You've made my weekend feel special.
Thank you.
Now, do you want to, all of you, unmute? And we can start with an applaud, which we'll do in just a moment. And after that, we'll have some questions. I'm just watching the unmutes as they go.
Thank you.
That was really good, wasn't it? Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you very, very much.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Wonderful, Alwyn. You really have given us a great deal of pleasure this evening. And even though I edited the poems, they don't need very much changing, I have to say, and got them printed and so on, there's always that extra pleasure hearing them read out loud by the author. It gives you that dimension that makes things superly exciting. So if anybody, I've got one piece of information in the chat, which is from Scarano. Is that Carla, did you say? Saying great
Yes,
poems.
Carla, yes.
Brilliant, great
Yes,
poems.
I really loved
Alwyn.
it. I went straight to the website and bought the book. Yes, lovely poem. Yes.
That's marvelous. Several people have the book now, and it's really great. And I wondered if anybody has any questions or things that they would like to say. It would be very helpful if you could either wave at me or use the reactions button at the bottom of my screen. So, yes, Romola, hi there.
Hi. Thank you, Alwyn. I always think it's very special to hear an author reading their poems, because I think they become mediated by a reader's perspective. And I found, as you know, I've been tussling with a female saint for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And I'm not a sort of feminist. And I think reading this over the last couple of days has sort of, I don't know, I found it quite comforting in that it's managed to be about women, but not sort of aggressively feminist, because that's kind of what makes me a bit cold. And so I found it actually very comforting and I think world opening, because I always sort of step back from a sort of hardline feminism or a hardline fundamentalist anything. So I think you've managed to play with the feminine in many different chords, many different voices. And I just wanted to ask a question about form, because do you choose the form, or does the form choose the subject? I mean, I'm sure it's not the same for every poem, but I mean, some of these are quite a sort of recognizable form, and some of them are much more subtle, and some of them sort of spill over the edges in a wonderfully sort of free kind of way.
I don't think I generally choose to write in a form. I think it arrives. The glows I did, I thought it's an interesting form and I'd try it. There's a villanelle, which is in the poem, and there's several loose sonnets, some rhyming, some non-rhyming. But in general, the poem starts to grow and develop and says what it wants to be. And sometimes I have to tinker a bit at the end to just make it behave itself a bit better, because my poems don't always behave themselves very well. But thank you, Emma. I appreciate that point, thank you. But I must also say that I am a feminist, and that feminism doesn't have to be aggressive.
Yes, maybe I'm just being hypersensitive, I suppose.
That's fine. I appreciate that, but I have to come on, to be honest.
I probably am, but I defy description. I don't like being put in a box, I think, but
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions at the moment?
Oh.
Hi, Rodney.
Ah, there we go. As always, I was particularly struck by the musicality of the poems and the intimate tone you were using when you were reading them, Alwyn. But I also noticed you used I an awful lot in the poems, but after a while, it didn't really seem to matter. You know, there's sort of, just someone talking to me about an experience which anyone could have had, not necessarily you. But is that sort of a right way of interpreting the poems?
I wasn't aware that I was reading a lot with I in, but it's quite possible. In fact, I read more of the personal experience ones this evening than of the historical women. But even with historical women, sometimes I write as though I was that woman, I think.
Yes, I find I do that as well.
Yeah, music is very important to me. I play the piano and various other things. I love music, and yeah, it must be in the poetry, mustn't it? It can be in prose as well. Some prose writers are very musical as well.
So, Rodney, when you're writing, do you find yourself writing from personal experience, or?
Well, it starts from personal experience, but after a while, it becomes a general sort of experience. I sort of find, I'm sort of not writing for me, I'm sort of writing for everyone in a way, or poems that people wish they could have written themselves. And perhaps that's the best way of talking about your poems, Alwyn.
Maybe.
Poems other people wish they'd written.
That's true. So, Alwyn, how much of your own life is documented in these poems? What do you think?
Well, I am a woman. I care very much about other women. I care about men as well, actually, but in this instance, it's women. I was interested, I mean, as you know, Camilla, some of the poems you chose, and I was quite surprised at, and some of them weren't written years and years ago, but refer to things like my childhood. I didn't write those at the time, but I was interested when the collection started to come together. There are poems about my childhood and my youth. And yes, you can look through the book and see quite a lot of my history. You'd learn quite a lot about me if you read the whole book. There's my years traveling for Feed the Minds, the charity. There's young romance and there's marriage, and there's a few about my parents as well, actually. Yeah, I think probably quite a lot. How can you write poetry without it coming from your own experience? I mean, certainly when I write about historical women, what I'm doing, and I don't think I'm doing this intentionally, but what I'm actually doing is to trying to get into their skin and to understand who they are and to speak through their mouths. So yes, that's not my experience, but it becomes my experience because I'm relating to them and trying to understand them.
I suppose when an editor gets hold of a set of poems, they begin to try and create an order and sections and so on. At least certainly I do. And probably I could have taken several different tacks in looking at your work, but the one that came to me was how well you dealt with the transitions that women make from girl to woman and from family around you and far too busy to a house that's emptying. These subjects you write really well about, and I found that particularly interesting.
Right, thank you.
So that's why I kind of had that chronological sweep running through the book, because it brought those into.
Right, okay. And I don't really know why I've written so many about women. As I say, there's an awful lot more. I've probably done another whole book of them. But we do hold up half the world, half the sky. So presumably it's not that surprising that quite a lot of them are about women. But I do write about other things too.
Mm. So you've got you reckon another book about women out there. Do you think it will have a similar content, or are the things in that book? I remember that we both regret the fact that we haven't got anything about Mary.
Yeah, which was surprising, actually.
Yeah.
Those of you who know
And
me
I
will
kind of wish you'd told me earlier in the process. But do you think it will have more of a slant towards women from religious orders and religious stories?
No, not necessarily, I don't think. And I say that I've got enough for another book, and I might do that in time. But actually, I want to focus on the one about the NGO now, about traveling for an aid agency, because I met so many wonderful people. And it's important to try and get stories about real people in hard situations into people's minds. So that's the one I'm going to focus on next. I've written about over half of them, and I'll carry on, and I might even come knocking on your door. I don't know.
Well, it's a subject that very much interests me. My parents used to travel in Africa and the Middle East for human rights and for aid agencies, and I've always been fascinated by those subjects.
Yeah.
Are there any more questions in the audience? Yes, Joan.
A slightly flippant question, Alwyn. In the poem that you read about the King and Queen statue, the Henry Moore and Dumfries and Galloway, you had obviously written about the King. Were you tempted to write about the Queen rather than the male figure?
Okay.
She didn't have any nice smooth bits about her torso, but
yeah, that's a fair point, Joan. But actually, if you read the poem again, you'll find that the nub of it is the lady's toe, the Queen of Heaven.
Oh, of course, yes.
So that's the woman. The King's incidental. I tell you one thing though, I put up the picture, and when I put the picture, I thought, that doesn't really show the shiny knee, which it should do, but it has got it did have a shiny knee.
Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this evening. What do you think, Alwyn? Shall we stop now?
Okay. I've got a number of different other readings coming up if anybody's around. It's funny because after 2 really bleak years during COVID, when we writers suffered by not having readings, because we do rely on readings for our income and also for the impetus to keep going. This year so far has proved really wonderful. I've had a couple of lovely events with music concerts where it's mainly been music, but they've asked me to go along and read some of my poems. But I've got, I don't know, another 7 or 8 readings in the next few months. And the next one is lovely. It's up at St. Martha's on the Hill, the Pilgrim Church on the Pilgrim's Way, where they're doing a series of music concerts through June. Which I shall try and go to all of them. But the second one is not going to be a music concert, it's going to be me. But actually one of the poems I didn't read tonight, it was about Hildegard of Bingen. And I didn't read it because it needs a bit of explanation about some of her theology before you read it. But probably given the audience, I could have got away with that. But I think that somebody's going to come and sing some of her music, which will be wonderful. Have any of you heard some of Hildegard's music?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's ethereal, it really is. So that's going to be really quite an exciting.
Feather on the breath of God.
Anyway, thank you very much, Camilla. And thank you all of you for coming. It's lovely to see you.
It's really good of you to come. I've put the link in the chat for anyone who wants to see how to buy the book, or you can just come to the Palewell Press website and you'll find it's the most recent book there. And it's been an enormous pleasure this evening to hear these poems come to life. And I've now got time to read the book myself as a reader. And you wouldn't believe, if you don't edit like myself and Alwyn, how much more pleasure you can get once it's in its book form from going back to poems that you edited and seeing them, so to speak, authenticated by being put into print in a way that's quite surprising. Anyway, I'm looking forward to going back through this, and thank you all very, very much for your time this evening. It's been lovely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody. Great to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.